Good evening and welcome to Windows on the World. We're now back live after a series of shows which were pre-recorded, mainly because I was in a totally different time than UK time. I was 7 hours ahead. In actual fact, it was great because it allowed me even more time to prepare the shows, because I thought, well, it's only 5 a.m. in the morning in the UK. It might be the middle of the morning or early afternoon here. It was actually quite refreshing. It gave me the whole day and a very long day to prepare the shows. But back in the UK and looking at the political landscape is what we're going to be doing this week. Now, we've talked a lot over the years about the bought and paid for world of British fake politics, the treacherous nature of the parasites in public office, and of course the lobbyists who buy them. A bit of an overview for tonight's show now. Ever since Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the UK Labour Party, he's been the victim of just about every possible type of slander and lies. In fact, as a study of how the UK media work hand in hand with the narrative controllers in politics and the lobbyists in charge, it is a study that should become a new thesis, which could become a way of bringing about a new antithesis to counter simple but effective propaganda tools based around character assassination and blatant but persistent lies. I think that's a very strong point, that if lies are blatant but persistent, they do eventually stick, and that's the theory behind that sort of propaganda. But as a lesson in basic propaganda techniques, this could be a good study. So in other words, the actual leadership and the issues around Jeremy Corbyn and the problems he's had are a great study of how basic propaganda works. So let's just think of this. There's nothing to compare with the barefaced cheek of these disgusting self-serving but bought and paid for puppets. It doesn't matter whether it's Chuka Umunna or Tom Watson or those crying anti-Semitism every other syllable and all the other manipulative con artists who have only the most obvious barefaced lies to offer in their defence. The morally bankrupt are being imposed on the public by big money, and that's all there is to it. Now, the Blairite faction of the UK Labour Party, who are now alleged, or were in the UK Labour Party, and are now allegedly independent of the Labour Party, are leeches, and in my opinion will lie all day long. They all kind of deserve each other, and they've all ended up in the same place. And they will all bow down to mammon and the promise of privilege, which is exactly why they're called Blairites. But let's not forget the false opposition of the Tories, who were the same mob as the Blairites, and also the same type of change agents. I mean, just think of change agent persona himself, David Cameron. He was the instigator of the so-called Big Society, which is the dystopian nightmare which we are now finding ourselves in. But the audacity of political parasites knows no limits, and that's how they're trained. A good example of how the hopelessly mediocre rise to the top with a little help was the announcement on behalf of herself that the useless but unfathomably confident Blairite MP Jess Phillips would be a good Prime Minister. Now, this was not coming from a third party, but was said by the dish mop herself with no sense of irony. I mean, irony requires self-awareness, so she's forgiven for not possessing any. But in the new dystopia, these less than competent, ego-driven and suitably unintelligent manipulators are mentored and unleashed on the unsuspecting public. Yes, they really are selected, and not for their integrity or intelligence. The puppet masters and their minions rule over the political media landscape, and those who confront them are attached to negative associations and slander. It's very simple, but why, oh why, is it still so effective? Or is it? Okay, so having laid that out, it is effective in the world of the fake news mafia, but is it really working on the victims, those that believe their vote counts? Well, the public do still listen to LBC and the BBC and still argue over points which they've been given to argue over, rather than looking at the bigger picture, which is one of the things that, or subjects that's reiterated by this show practically every week in different elements and from different angles. But it's now clearly obvious that the Brexit inaction plan was always to go wholly against the majority public vote. It has come rather unstuck because of the clumsiness of those who are hoodwinking the public, which is the interesting point here. However, the public are still arguing over the detail handed to them on a plate to divert them away from the facts. The Global Action Plan will not allow Brexit. This is a fact. It will do anything to obfuscate this reality, and they keep doing it, even announcing 2 possible dates, which we're going to get into a little bit later. I've got Piers Corbyn actually listening in here, and he's going to be joining me in a minute. But just to finish off this section, the French have proved that it is possible to make puppets squirm and expose themselves as the reprehensible creatures they really are, as in the case of Yellow Vests versus Macron. Will the British public ever wake up to what the French decided en masse to oppose? And of course, they've been derided in the usual ways, with the usual slander being attached to being Nazis and supremacists and maybe even climate change deniers. But the point is that in France, that doesn't seem to have worked. Is it possible that's going to be the case in the UK? From the point of view of looking at what's happening in this country, I'd say it was less likely to happen here. I'd be interested to see what other people have got to say about that. But the example that the UK Labour Party leadership has been trampled on by these wannabes, narcissists and parasites is a good one, I think, which is why I've opened with that. But the leader, in my opinion, I'm going to get Piers in on this in a minute, but leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy, has let this happen, in my opinion, and should have told all these subversives to leave and never come back. Or am I being too harsh? I've always said that someone with so many knives in their back is probably best not to attack one person, otherwise the mob will turn. But that's happened anyway, so I think we're in a very interesting stage with all this. But the public would have been behind Jeremy Corbyn. He had their support, and to an extent still has, though people are disappointed that, in my view, I feel, and from what I glean from people, is that they're kind of disappointed that he's let things go this far away from what they expected when he was actually, you know, being put into the media spotlight and the public were behind him. They've done everything they could possibly to destroy him, but he's still here, which is probably in some ways fairly encouraging. But this public office parasite, Tom Watson, deputy leader of the Labour Party, was given 500,000 in donations by Max Mosley in the past year. Now, why do people not actually pick up on this? Especially, I would say that it's like a bit of a obvious kind of thing when these bought out puppets receive all this money. But the register of MPs' interest shows that the former Formula One boss gave money to support Watson's office as deputy leader and shadow culture secretary, bought and paid for basically. And when you look at how momentum has been used to control the party through John Landsman, then it all starts to look like what it is. A coup, really. Now, getting on to another point, that even Uri Geller claims that he will stop Brexit telepathically, right? Now, he knows full well it will not be allowed to happen. But Yuri is a good example of someone who's been utterly caught out and debunked, but is still getting publicity from the idiots in print and waffle. Now, does this sound familiar? Maybe he should have been a politician too. Now, Geller knows the Global Action Plan will not allow Brexit. This is pretty obvious, but there's no need to suffer the humiliation he had to go through on live TV when his telepathic skills left him for the entire show. It's really worth looking at, that show. It's on the Johnny Carson show on YouTube, but he hasn't offered to stop Michael Jackson, allegedly his close friend, from the slander being aimed at the dead singer. He hasn't brought that up, but see, that's not trivial enough for the media. But just search Yuri Geller caught cheating and his abysmal excuse for an appearance on the Johnny Carson show. Like Blairites, Yuri has more front than Margate. But as for the online petition to revoke Article 50, Channel 4 News reported on this, and there was a guy called Steve Edgington from Leave Means Leave, and he said that the online petition to revoke Article 50 is so open to abuse. He used 3 fake emails and did it within 5 minutes. He said, I signed it 3 times in the names Donald Tusk, Jean-Claude Juncker and Michael Barnier. The studio stooge for the Remain coup then stated that their media intelligence unit would pick up people using fake names. Now, would this be the sort of intelligence we are used to hearing about through the security services? I think it probably could be. But what about the thousands of Israeli trolls we reported on in a previous show, which seem to have slipped through the net? Now, I'm going to bring Piers in a minute because we're going to get his sort of reaction to my opening rant there, as I'm just back in the UK. And basically, we've now got Piers in the studio. I've been reporting from different parts of the world for the past 2 months, so we're now back at Windows Towers at a secret location in North London. I'm just going to bring Piers in, and I'm going to offer him a microphone here.
Right.
I'm going to could you clip this on, right? and then we can hear you.
Okay, and what are we hearing you? Oh, you've got another mic.
Oh, yeah, so yeah, we've got it all sorted out.
Am I loud and clear?
Oh, you're very loud and very clear.
Okay.
Yes, so
I like to be loud and clear.
Before we get on to other fake news and even a great piece in The Guardian, which we want to run by you as an example of the post-truth world, what's your reaction to what's going on at the moment, and what's your reaction to my opening rant?
Well, I think it was a brilliant rant, actually, and these are the most exciting times
Right.
we've had for a long, long time in the world. There's a lot of stuff you said. I would say that just focusing first of all on the little things you mentioned about that petition. There was someone else on Twitter who said they had put 33,000 fake signatures on that petition in 5 minutes using an automated thing, because there's nothing in that petition to prevent people just putting names in. Because when you go in, there's not one of those walls which says you've got to prove you're not a machine and then type something out. So that 4 million signatures in whatever time means completely nothing. I think the point to understand about the current situation is everything you see and hear is largely fake, largely manufactured, and part of a gigantic mind game to force Britain into submission with the EU. Now, Mark, you led with the statement that the authorities won't let it happen. Now, look, the authorities...
Well, it depends what we call the authorities. I mean, I'm not really talking about the puppets in Parliament. I'm talking about the bigger picture, which is what we talk about. And from the point of view of this global perspective, I mean, I'm giving the hypothetical kind of scenario that it won't be allowed to happen from that perspective. And that's what I'm trying to get over, in that the public seem to be focusing on the rather trivial kind of distraction issues which they're given, and not being able to see this bigger thing behind it. And my example of, let's say, what's happened in France, could that happen here, is kind of a good one, I think, because
yes,
it shows
but
it shows that kind of difference, doesn't it? I mean, having been to several countries and on different continents for the past few months, one thing I do notice is that the British public are much more brainwashed than people are elsewhere. And they also kind of conversely have this idea that they actually are very well informed when they're not. And I think that's a huge problem, especially with what's going on with Brexit.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. But as to the question of will the United Kingdom leave the European Union or not, well, I think that's still an open question, but I still think they could, despite the fact that other referenda throughout Europe have been ignored or overruled or rerun, because the British economy is actually bigger than those other ones where withdrawal was taking place. However, we've got to have a bit of understanding as to what is going on. First of all, in the Labour Party matters of my brother, you're absolutely right. Everything has been thrown at him because he represents a threat to the Wall Street interests when he talks about, sharing out wealth a bit more fairly, for example, and intelligent things like nationalising the railways, which means certain people won't profit from them anymore. But over the European Union, of course, there are certain difficulties because the Labour Party policy is basically that they like the EU, but they've also stated that they respect the ballot. Well, those are contradictory positions. You can't carry on liking the EU and respect the ballot. So Jeremy has to do many things in order to deal with that contradiction. But I think in terms of those people who've left the Labour Party, it's great. They should have gone ages ago, and he's better off without them. Now,
exactly. I think that's a really good point.
Those
because
particular people.
Yeah,
I'm not saying ordinary members.
Well, I think it's brilliant. And you've got the arrogance of people like Chuka Ramona, who really wanted to be in charge of it. You know, this narcissist who wants to be in charge, who's a complete puppet and has got no integrity, in my opinion. Then I think it is great that they've all ended up in the same place, but what took them so long to do it? I mean, I thought it would have been great if Jeremy could have preempted that and told them where to go.
Well, it would be, but then, of course, if they go in anyway, perhaps avoid the difficulty.
Well, it took them a long time to leave, didn't it? You know, it's like, I'm leaving. Well, go on then. No, I'm leaving. Well, go on then.
Well, it's like all these empty threats, but, the public as a whole and Labour Party members in general are really pleased that these guys are out of the way, and hopefully they'll be replaced by people with, serious commitment to the people they're supposed to represent. Okay, anyway, now look at sort of practical things about the EU then. Now, I think what we're now in is a period of mind games. See, if you bring a fake gun onto somebody, the last thing you want to do is keep an ultimatum. What you say is, we'll give you more time. And now, of course, funnily enough, the European Union have popped up not with one deadline, but two deadlines. Now, the reason why they come up with these deadlines is because any intelligent person that's looked at what's really going on with exiting the European Union is that it'll be a Y2K moment. Nothing will happen. The question of lorries not being able to cross borders, no problem. That's been solved. Question of cars not coming, no problem. Question of medicines being held up, no problem. Everything practical has already been sorted. And the Irish border question is a deliberate game in order to focus the minds of MPs on so they can wave it away in a moment sometime, while ignoring the other impositions in that agreement. Now, that agreement was written in Germany. It contains Germanisms, and it maintains basically European Union rule over Britain. And they don't want to talk about the worst parts of it. Instead, they prattle on about the Irish border. So what we have is a mind game where they are supposedly generously postponing leaving because of the terror it's going to cause, which is complete bullshit. And the time they're gaining, the European Union is gaining, either till the 22nd of May if people at the Parliament stupid enough to vote to cut their own heads off, or April the 12th if they're not stupid enough to vote to cut their own heads off. Now, the European Union want to use that time to browbeat, threaten, trick MPs into adopting this treacherous sellout to what I would call is the Fourth Reich, i.e. the modern European Union, which is dominated by Germany. What will happen in this time of a few weeks, we don't know, but I would say it's an ideal time for all sorts of emergency nonsenses to happen. Who knows? But anything that happens will become a problem and used to justify signing this deal. In my opinion, the absolute best thing would be MPs to refuse to allow anything at all, and we leave on the 29th of this month. Now, personally, I am going to leave the European Union myself on the 29th of this month, meaning that I'm going to start on that day boycotting all European goods from shops. And I'll also be supporting the march and roadblocks. Well, I'm supporting the march already, but roadblocks and, you know, anything, demonstrations outside European Union countries, embassies or whatever. But we have to assert our independence, and leave now, talk later is the only way to get anything out of the European Union. It's a bit like having a divorce. You don't say to your other half, yes, we're going to divorce, but tell you what, let's just leave it for 1,000 days. It's 1,000 days since it was decided to leave, and then the dates come. And, oh dear, we need more, 10 days more or something. This is utter nonsense. It's utter, complete, total nonsense. If you want to make the EU talk, you leave now, and they will. The Germans need to sell their cars here, and they'll come to any agreement about whatever, because the fact is the European Union sells more to Britain than Britain does to the European Union. And out we'll get cheaper food from Africa and so forth. There's all sorts of things, but instead of concentrating on the positive aspects, what we have is MPs, as you say, Mark, have been imprisoned into talking detail. So I'm saying to people out there, stand firm. I dare say most people listening are leavers, so to speak. But look, if you know any Remain friends, just ask them one question. What is the point in remaining in the European Union? There isn't actually any logical point in remaining. The place is falling apart. It's costing 39 billion. And it is a deindustrialising system which has taken the British economy to pieces in terms of manufacturing over the last few decades. And we don't want that to carry on. We can carry on relating to the European Union through trade agreements. We can have a trade agreement, but the best way to talk about that is after we've left. So that's my message. Stand firm and, hope my brother can do whatever is possible to move in that direction. And you should write to your MP or phone your MP up now and say, we want to leave on the 29th of this month, and that is the end of it.
Well, I would actually, but my MP wouldn't talk to me anymore after I confronted her on her lack of action or her inaction over a phone mast that was put up after being turned down in a public debate. And when she said she couldn't do anything about it, I knew that she was of absolutely no use whatsoever. Stella Creasy from Walthamstow. Now, moving swiftly on, because we've talked enough about the puppets, we'll move on to a piece I found in The Guardian, which surpasses even the globalist lying extremism that we've been talking about so far. A piece so nonsensical that it is a great example of what goes on in the minds of the victims of ideological subversion and political correctness. Yes, our so-called news media. Now, the opinion pieces in The Guardian are the results of a constant stream of crap implanted into the heads of those who will never source a story or accept facts over feelings and programming. Very important point, I think, that one. Those who cannot question anything outside the Stasi narratives that they can never get away from in the latte-swilling world of fake news. This is basically where they are. The mental helplessness of their daily pieces on climate change, these ones in The Guardian, are a fact-free zone, and in future could be used to prove that the present time is a post-truth and fact-free world which has had all critical thinking removed by consensus, by group consensus, that is. So let's have a look at this article, which is one of the most ridiculous pieces I have ever seen in a newspaper. Now, get this. It's called Why Climate Action is the Antithesis of White Supremacy. Do you feel a thesis coming on here?
Oh my God.
No, it's quite impossible to get your head around until you actually get into the mindset of the person who wrote it. She's called Rebecca Solnit, and she actually works for a change agent company, which I'll get onto into a bit, which is basically saying that we need to stop using fossil fuels. You know, it's got the World Bank, the IMF and globalism written all over this organisation. We'll get to that a bit later. However, Why climate action is the antithesis of white supremacy. Now, the idiocy of the title and the lumping together...
Well, it's pseudo-intellectual crap, isn't it?
Well, it's not even intellectual, but we will get into that, right?
It's not even that.
No, it's not pseudo, no.
Dead.
Well, we've only got... That's just the title, Piers. Let's get into the article. Come on. The idiocy of the title and the lumping together of unrelated propaganda is everything that has gone wrong in the heads of the metropolitan minds of the Monbiot mind virus. That's George Monbiot, by the way. Now, this piece by Rebecca Solnit exposes that not only is brainlessness a virtue in the post-truth world, but nothing has to make sense either. Now, let's have a look at what she says. She goes on, behind the urgency of climate action is the understanding that everything is connected. Behind white supremacy is an ideology of separation. Now, she has the... No, let's get into this. Because
not everything being connected. That's a contradiction.
Well, let's get on with this. This is unbelievable, right? So she has the belief that those who fall for the climate change agenda somehow see the interconnectedness of everything, and that those she supposes are classed as racists and narrow-minded and separated from the interconnected whole. Now, that's a very childish analogy, but it is actually an analogy, but she's got it completely wrong. So has she half read, not fully read, has she half read a Deepak Chopra book and applied the New Age principles along with reading a bit of Hindu philosophy and somehow had a revelation over this brainless comparison? Or is it the result of dabbling with psychedelics over the weekend? You know, it's hard to tell, isn't it? However, after going on about the Christchurch shooting, she states that climate change is based on science. Now, this is a meaningless statement, as climate change is based on the climate changing, right? So well, it's not absolutely based on science. So she's again lumped together two things that are not connected.
But for her, the concept of climate change,
everything's interconnected. Everything's interconnected. You see, Piers. Yeah, everything's interconnected.
Yeah,
you see, man. This is the whole thing. I mean, you're pushing your ideology of separation.
Pass the spliff, man.
Yeah, well, you're not going to say that on air.
No, I don't. I've never smoked in my life.
No, well, we don't do that sort of thing in Windows Towers. It's a non-smoking environment. Now, that doesn't mean if someone turned up with their pipe, for instance, that I would say, put your pipe out, you know, something like that.
I'll say pipe down.
Yeah, but we certainly don't allow any sort of mood-altering substances apart from tea, you see. So anyway, let's get back to the Gormless Guardian. Now, so she said this is a meaning... Basically, she said that climate change is based on science. Well, what a stupid thing to say. And why would an editor let anyone put that in? It's a non sequitur, isn't it?
It's like saying road signs are based on science.
Yes. Yeah. It's that the propaganda she believes is science is also a religion. It's not a pack of lies pushed by the UN with no facts, but that would be beyond the capacity of the writer of this piece, you see. So that's my point, is that they can never look beyond what the propaganda is in front of them. But she waffles on and states, but if you delve into it deeply enough, it is a kind of mysticism without mystification, a recognition of the beautiful interconnection of all life and the systems, weather, water, soil, seasons, oceans, pH, on which that life depends. Comparing the creative... Basically, this is what she's doing, right? Comparing the creative power of nature, the awesome power of nature, to a political agenda. And it's as laughable as stating that those who are labelled with a negative attachment like white supremacism or being a neo-Nazi or climate change denier are those who are separate from the interconnected whole, because she said they are. So in other words, she's creating the separation. This is the whole point of it. And that maybe, basically, they have been demonized for political purposes, these people outside. You know, she doesn't go into that. By those who are separated from the whole, those who are pushing the draconian totalitarian action plan around the provable false agenda of blaming humans for blighting the planet. This is the important thing, right? That not only is the point missed, but there's actually no connection between anything in this article that she's saying. She carries on, everything is connected. That to dig up the carbon that plants so helpfully sequestered in the ground over eons and burn it so that returns to the sky as carbon dioxide changes the climate, and that this changed climate isn't just warmer, it's more chaotic in ways that break these elegant patterns and relationships. Now, she's just basically made this up, yeah, because...
It's entirely made up last time, yeah. Completely made up.
But it's the fact that somebody could actually put this together and say that they can see a bigger picture and an interconnected whole. You know, this is the amazing thing about this. Now, these are unqualified statements and confuse climate change with pollution. Now, this is a point, you see, Piers, that I wanted to get onto, yeah? So what she's done there, she's basically brought all these things together, climate change, pollution, and brought them together, and then they're separate things. They're not connected, right?
Yeah,
so it's a common error among these latte-swilling urban-dwelling idiots, right? Now, this next statement that she makes David Attenborough sound like a climate scientist, right? Let's get this.
That's impossible.
That chaos is a kind of violence. The violence of hurricanes, wildfires, new temperature extremes, broken weather patterns, droughts, extinctions, famines, which is why climate action has been and must be non-violent. It is a movement to protect life. Now, what is this about now? Because I'm actually losing...
Well, some of them are violent anyway.
Well, that's the whole point. Yes, they are. Exactly. And stupid and violent. But the point is that she's going on again, confusing weather and climate with basically these kind of extremes that she's put down to man-made global warming and climate change. Now, she falls into the trap that these wafflers usually fall into. Basically, yes, just comparing weather and climate with upheavals caused by man-made global warming.
Or plastic bags.
So she's tacked her sort of ideology of choice on, or not her ideology of choice, her brainwashing program. She's attached her brainwashing program onto this. So, in fact, she uses the exact propaganda used by the Club of Rome to implement the idea that humans are responsible for the climate changing. That was where I was going with it, you see. In other words, she's spouting the rhetoric of globalists. Yeah. In fact, basically, this is what the Club of Rome targeted in its campaign to reduce world population. So not only is this person completely unaware of any kind of truth, they're actually working towards global depopulation and basically this control system. So in 1993, the Club of Rome's co-founder Alexander King with Bertrand Schneider wrote the first global revolution, and we do bring this up in the talks. Now get this: the common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. Now, this sounds just exactly like the sort of propaganda that she's putting out. So thanks for being a globalist stooge and useful idiot of the week, as well as calling yourself a journalist, Rebecca Solnit, and contributing to the lies and mental midgetry of The Guardian, the lowest common denominator for the terminally brainwashed. Now, we do bring that up pretty much every week, but it never ceases to amaze me that every single day they have a story about climate change which doesn't contain any facts. And basically, this one takes these sort of ideologies to extremes, you know. I mean, basically, this sort of half-baked idea that people who are tagging themselves onto the global warming agenda and not environmentalism in any way are somehow in an interconnected whole. I mean, this is just like exactly the sort of thing that the so-called conspiracy theorists would call the Illuminati. Do you know what I mean? It's it's absolutely unbelievable that anyone could come out with this. Well, let's carry on with this unique example of mental helplessness, right? She says, it's no accident that climate denial is integral to right-wing thinking. Did you hear that? So you're right-wing now. So this is
insane. Well, there's people in Canada which have pointed out, they say, look, you don't have to be right-wing to accept science. I mean, you know, it's a complete nonsense.
Well, it's a non sequitur, as we were saying earlier. But
it's a label. It's the use of labels because they've got nothing better to do.
Yes, I think originally it started out that, you know, it would have been part of the sort of agenda of the group that they call neocons, who they always labelled as these sort of warmongering people who are ruining the planet, you see. So what they've done is they've tagged that onto everyone else now.
Well, everything bad goes together, you see.
Of course, yeah.
And they're everything good, you see.
Yeah.
That's their idea, but it is utter nonsense. But, see, we're all part of an interconnected whole. Do you realise that now?
Well, I've always actually
we're somehow
known
connected
this,
to space and the
yes, I mean,
cosmos.
in my moments of
and
revelation...
are you denying this?
No,
you're not. My God,
I'm not. No, of course.
So you're not a white supremacist denier.
No,
I'm
not a separatist, Piers. I'm into the interconnected whole. I mean, the thing is that our talks are called The Bigger Picture. Maybe Rebecca would like to come along and see what interconnectedness really is.
We should bring her along to debate.
Yes, because an interconnected view of things is essential. But half reading a Deepak Chopra book at lunchtime over a sandwich is not the same thing, you see. So the comparison between real climate science being right-wing is a great analogy of the post-truth world. Everything I don't like is Nazi, yeah? All this sort of stuff. Now, Republicans in the US, she carries on, have been freaking out about the Green New Deal. That maximising fossil fuel development and profit seems to be a cornerstone of their libertarian capitalist ideology. Now, this is just absolute spouting nonsense, rhetoric rubbish, basically. She promotes the taxation and population reduction scam with no examination of facts or presenting any evidence, just generalising in the lazy-brained way through the lens of the fake news media. She confuses clean coal energy used by the majority of countries with capitalism, when in fact the so-called Green Deal would see an extinction of most of the poorer inhabitants of the planet through reducing carbon to zero, and that's mass extinction. Now, where does that fit into the analogy of climate change propaganda? Like connectedness, where does it fit into the analogy of climate change propaganda equals connectedness and racism equals separateness? So this is just a brilliant example of the post-truth world, and this kind of way that they attach their kind of beliefs to things which are totally unrelated. Now, the New Age self-help entitled waffle continues. Here we go. To acknowledge that everything is connected is to acknowledge that our actions have consequences and therefore responsibilities they are unwilling to shoulder. Now, this is a bit of philosophy wrongly attached to an unconnected subject, as we've said, but let's get not too picky about it, because basically what she's done, she's read a little bit of Deepak Chopra or a little bit of Hindu philosophy and tried to tag it on to her ideology, right? And the reason that I think this is a great example of the crap that's in The Guardian is because it's extreme, right? It's absolutely extreme, and it doesn't make any sense. But she needs to. She also states that the solutions to climate change require cooperative work at all levels, from local energy transition to national policies that stop subsidising fossil fuels, to international agreements to set emission goals, right? So that's sort of like something out of a UN worded document,
the subsidies go to the green nonsense.
Exactly. Now, she needs to see our show, The Green Energy Agenda, as what she says is actually the opposite of the reality. Now, in contrast, she goes on, so much of right-wing ideology now is about a libertarian machismo in the I can do anything I want vein. Again, this is like this fake philosophical view of the world which is attached to things. Now, she generalises again using a bunch of uncorroborated sound bites and seems to have slipped into the climate change autistic spectrum of unreality, which is where most people who write for The Guardian are. She carries on with this, right? This is unbelievable. It's the pro-gun myth that we can protect ourselves with a weapon, when in reality we're all safer with them out of our societies. Well, hang on a minute. That's another untrue statement, as nearly everyone in Switzerland owns a gun, and there's pretty much zero crime, right? But she obviously doesn't venture out into areas where stabbings and shootings happen on a daily basis. And this has nothing to do with using a weapon to protect yourself, but it's the idea that we can deregulate she carries on, it's the idea that we can deregulate the hell out of everything and everyone can just look out for themselves, whether it's food safety or infrastructure safety or air and water quality. Now, this outlook is typical of this sort of brainwashed urban media. The idea that some kind of chaos ensues when there's less regulation, when in fact it's the opposite. In fact, in rural areas where people look after themselves, they also look after each other, right? These are just facts, you know. To kill someone, she says, you have to feel separate from them, and some violence, lynching, rape, ritualises this separateness. I mean, what has this got to do with the weather? Do you know what I mean? I'm failing to grasp it now because it's just gone off. But the insight is phenomenal, you know.
I think she's had something. She must have taken something to write that article.
Well, that's what I think. I think she's read a bit of a Deepak Chopra book, and then she's had a mild psychedelic experience and turned up to work on Monday and thought this was a really good idea. Well, we're here to remind you that it's not. You know, you've made a fool of yourself. And she carries on. Violence, too, comes out of a sort of entitlement, does it? Does violence come out of a sense of entitlement?
Why waste the print?
I know.
Why waste the trees to print this nonsense? I mean,
this is a very good point.
How many trees were destroyed for her to spout this drivel?
Well, you know, the point is that what sort of editor would allow this to be printed? That's a more important point. She carries on, I have the right to hurt you, to determine your fate, to end your life. I am more important than you. It seems like, among other things, a miserable mindset, one that aggrandizes your ego but withers your soul. Again, a bit of New Age rambling. From the Deepak Chopra book, she half digested with a sandwich, you know, but it's just incredible. She carries on, our work as climate activists arises from the recognition that acts have consequences. Oh, we're onto the karma here now, you see. We're onto the bigger picture, the karma. And consequences, and consequences come with responsibilities, and we are responsible for the fate of this earth, for all living things. You see, that this is this entitled attitude these people have. They actually think that we're somehow in control of this huge mechanism
turn
of
on
nature.
The CO2 knob and that'll change.
I mean, all you have to do is go into a plane or go to a remote part of the world, and you realise that you're talking about awesome powers here, right? Which are not in our control at all. They're way beyond our control. But for people like these urban latte swilling elite, this is what they believe, you know.
What's wrong with latte anyway?
I like lattes, but they've just, as Bon Jovi said, you give lattes a bad name. And in the future, she said, we are choosing with our actions or inactions in the present, but also from the recognition that ecological connectedness contains a deep beauty tantamount to love. Our goal as climate activists is to protect life, those children and youth standing up for the future in Christchurch and in more than 1,700 other cities around the world were already the answer we needed.
Well, what has the Christchurch shootings got to do with this?
She started off with that. That's what the article started off with. So I suppose she finished with it as well. It has nothing to do with it, it starts and finishes that. But it says Rebecca Solnit is a board member of Oil Change International, as well as a Guardian columnist. Her latest book is Call Them By Their True Names. Well, we'll call you by your true name. You're a deluded, entitled idiot. You know, I mean, I had to get through all that because I just couldn't believe that anyone would write it. But in a way, it backs up what our shows are really about. When we talk about this stuff, I actually am incredulous when I read this.
Yeah, it is unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I could comment at length, but I think, well, one interesting thing recently on Twitter, this was the Greta, what's her name?
Greta Thunberg.
Yes, their mouthpiece. She was complaining that banks had been giving money or lending money or handling the business of oil companies involving trillions of pounds. Yes. And shouldn't they be doing something better? Well, I put a response saying, well, actually, if they stopped doing that, your lights would go out. And if you actually want to worry about trillions being spent in any way, why not look at the arms trade? Because there, trillions and trillions are being spent, and surely this is a lot more dangerous than keeping your lights going. You know,
well, exactly what the
utter complete
thing
nonsense
is
people come up with.
That her statement was supported by the Club of Rome. Yes, so they're the instigators who made up the global warming fiction.
No, she's an abused child.
That's what we've reported on every week.
Mentally abused.
She's got Asperger's, and her parents are in show business, and they've pushed her. And basically, because she's very obsessive, they've made her believe that the world's going to end in 12 years. Well, I hope she's bloody angry when it doesn't. We've said this before.
That will happen, won't it? Anyway, a few points responding to the sort of background information. We've been challenging David Attenborough and George Monbiot to debate. and they were getting no response out of them. I noticed Attenborough has suddenly announced he's going to talk about real climate change as he sees it. Now, look, he's either a liar, which I tend to believe, or completely stupid, which I don't think he is. If he was to speak the truth, his fate would be the same as that of David Bellamy, i.e. he'd lose his job. So, I just think about that. But we've challenged them to actual debate. The reason why he's launching another thing about climate change now, I don't know, but I would think it's connected with the European Union, a general sort of crisis thing, because the climate change propaganda is very largely a child of the EU as well as the United Nations. And bringing in plastic bags into everything is another piece of ideological nonsense when there's nothing to do with climate whatsoever. So our challenge stands from Weather Action and the Scientists for Truth group. The actual facts of climate now are that there has been a vast increase in Arctic ice. We've got more snow in the northern hemisphere now than we've had for the last probably 50 years. These are the actual facts of the big picture numbers, which of course are ignored by the BBC. They talk about it's been warm in Weymouth or Kew Gardens, when of course Kew Gardens is a heat island anyway, with loads more buildings around it than for the last 1,000 years. But they use these as examples of somehow making you think that something that happens in 0.01% of the world, i.e. southern England, represents global warming, which of course it's twaddle, it doesn't. The fact is the world is cooling, and in the next 20 years we'll be suffering food shortages because of it. Already in Canada you can see there's snow everywhere where they should be thinking about planting, right? Planting wheat and so forth. So, there's going to be severe problems, and the UN and European Union are pointing the world in the wrong direction. Hopefully we're going to get this through soon, but it's very difficult because the whole ideology is to manipulate people. Now, I mentioned ideology. Now, it's worth just noting the fact that we now have we've got a raft of ideas, but what clings together a lot of these bad nonsense is the ideology of man-made climate change, which is anti-science based on falsity and fraud. Now, this is not the first time we've had a set of ideas or a specific belief system used to manipulate masses of people. The Eugenics Theory in the interwar years, of course, had all sorts of ideas about inheritance and therefore the need to, basically it was amounting to liquidate stupid people. All sorts of really racist stuff came out of eugenics, but that was believed by a lot of scientists at the time. They eagerly grabbed it. And it was used, again, to control people. Now, then, of course, in Nazi Germany, they had a whole set of ideas, some of which came from eugenics, but they were used to control. Then we had the Lysenko movement in Russia, which was false science about inheritance of acquired characteristics. Interesting ideas, but the point is they were essentially false, but they were used to manipulate the population. And both Germany and Russia, the USSR at the time, had youth movements attached to them which propagated all sorts of these ideas. Like in Russia, it was you're an enemy of the people if you don't support Lysenkoism, and if you don't support Lysenkoism you believed in capitalist science, not workers' science, and so forth. And the youth movement was used to bludgeon the adult population into line.
Well, that's exactly what they're doing
both
here.
In Germany and in Russia. And that is what is happening now. Now,
that's what Extinction Rebellion are doing.
That is exactly what Extinction Rebellion are doing. And I think people need to wake up. What happened to those movements in the past was very, very, very grim. We know about what happened in Germany. We know about what happened in Russia. Scientists who didn't agree were sent to the gulags, right? This was evil, evil, evil. And people need to stand up and fight for evidence-based, accountable science and politics.
Correct. But here's a word from their sponsors. This is from the Club of Rome, who obviously fully support their 16-year-old Asperger's unfortunate puppet, Greta Thunberg. It says, we deem the students' concerns, this is about these climate strikes by the kids, we deem the students' concerns to be utterly justified and irrefutable, and will continue to play our role in ensuring ambitious climate action. These courageous young leaders point to challenges for the planet and humanity, which have long been recognised by the scientists, economists, business leaders and experts within the Club of Rome. It has been 50 years since the limits to growth, which alerted the world to the acute environmental and demographic challenges ahead. Right? This is out of their book, The First Global Revolution. For anybody who wants to know where all this stuff came from, just have a look at that book, The First Global Revolution, Club of Rome. Just look it all up. Basically, they carry on. We concur with the Extinction Rebellion and the student protesters that we cannot turn a blind eye to the dual tipping points of species extinction and climate change. Emergency action is more necessary than ever and cannot be put off any longer. We no longer have the luxury of time. Now, this is going to take us into the final section of the show, where we're going to talk about, yes, the fake protest movement and the new Stasi, the new totalitarian state control over the minds of children who are going to be attacking their parents on behalf of the state. So basically, we have some information that came in through one of our listeners. Now, it's about the fake protest organisation, Extinction Rebellion, who are now really getting into action and getting up to all sorts of stupid publicity stunts, which are basically just to get their narcissistic followers out into the public, making bloody fools of themselves. It says the fake protest organisation Extinction Rebellion, backed by global interests, are on the same wavelength as this globalist stooge Rebecca Solnit and Oil Change International, what we talked about in the first part of the show. Now, see our shows on Extinction Rebellion and fake protests at windowsontheworld.net. Now, this is from Jane, and it came in to me today. And she says, just seen your stuff on the XR lot of fraudsters, that's Extinction Rebellion.
Yep.
And think you are bang on. I'm an activist myself and have seen a lot of people getting roped in by this new out of nowhere lot. I attended one of their meetings just to be sure of what I suspected. I was right. Now, this is quite interesting. Nothing more than a load of NLP/Delphi technique controlled opposition. Now, if people don't know what I mean there or what Jane means, Delphi technique is a way of controlling group consensus, and this I first noticed in the Occupy movement with their general assemblies and the change agents brought in to steer the Occupy movement into the climate change agenda. So this actually features the same people. Incidentally, as we were saying last week, the same people who subverted the Occupy movement went into the fracking movement, and we have great information from people who are at these fracking protests, and they're naming these people. One of them is a garden gnome with dreadlocks who has been around for a long time and who talks in sound bites. And everybody at PNR in up here near Preston New Road fracking community will know who I'm talking about. That's the dreadlock stroke hair extensions garden gnome, and he's been dividing and ruling up there for quite some time, as he did at Occupy. So yes, it's interesting that some of these people have been around for getting on for 30 years and they still haven't been rumbled by the majority of people. Only a few people seem to get it, you know. But basically she said, the Delphi technique controlled operation, right? She said it was blatant. No time for a Q&A session after either. How convenient, but time to get everyone who was present's details. So they basically take all your details down. Then they try and get you to engage in unlawful activity so you can get arrested. Now, you couldn't make it up, could you? Basically, she says they handed over all their details willingly without any questions to whom or where their personal data was going. Absolute idiots. Well, we know for a fact that the person who is one person in this Extinction Rebellion lot has actually fed us information about what's going on in there. And there's a very good chance it could be sabotage from the inside, because people are going to get so fed up with it that they're going to see through it. The other thing is that these entitled scroungers have stolen so much money from the public, and they're basically paying themselves to do nothing, in my opinion, because when I looked at who was getting what, it was a bit of a shock. And do have a read of that, because you can see it at windowsontheworld.net. Look up our Extinction Rebellion article and show, and you'll find the internal documents from them available there. But Jane carries on. Sadly for the fake French activist guy who was representing Extinction Rebellion, and who certainly needs far more training than he's had, I did manage to corner him in a couple of major urgent issues re our destruction, i.e. 5G and geoengineering. First he tried to pretend he knew nothing of geoengineering while squirming on the spot, and started showing his true impatient colours when questioned about these issues. Yes, a change agent. Needless to say, within 60 seconds he literally ran away and rudely refused to discuss anything. I have contacted this lot further to be told that geoengineering is a conspiracy theory and doesn't exist, and that they do not cover 5G. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because their head person, the person who's actually in charge of it all, and do look at that article, you will find out that she's connected to networks who are rolling out 5G. So do have a look at that article. But I've had a look at the texts that Jane has. I'm not going to read them out because I don't think we've got time, but they're incredibly interesting, because Jane was asking very basic questions, and the answers that were coming back were those of the change agent, and basically using techniques such as blocking. So in other words, I'm not talking to you anymore, that's it, you're a conspiracy theorist, or maybe you're a Nazi or something, or maybe you're a climate change denier, we don't know, do we? But basically, this is all coming out of the Club of Rome, and there's a great article on Technocracy News, which is something you can subscribe to, and I would suggest that you do, because it comes out with new stuff all the time. But he says the venerable global elite group, the Club of Rome, has tipped its hand by gushing over the Sunrise Movement and the Green New Deal, just to get back to what we were talking about before. So when you look at these fake protest groups like Extinction Rebellion, or this Asperger's girl pushed by her parents who have interests in the climate lobbying agenda, then it all goes back to the Club of Rome and this document, The Limits to Growth, and of course the First Global Revolution. And when the Trilateral Commission was co-founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski to establish a new international economic order, the Club of Rome members intermingled with the Bilderberg Group and members of the Commission. Now, the totality of the Green New Deal spectacle in America is precisely in line with the global elite's plan to force sustainable development upon the entire world. And if you don't know what sustainable development is, listen to our shows on Agenda 21, or better still, book our talk, The Bigger Picture. We lay out what's going on in your local area, and more importantly, what you can do about it, because unless you actually know how and why this stuff is being implemented, it won't make any sense to you whatsoever, because that's what people say. So they're doing this, they're doing that, they're closing the roads, they're building all these flats that no one can afford. It doesn't make any sense. Well, you have to know what the outcome for this is, and that's the important thing. Absolutely, that's just one of the aims. But basically, they did go on in this article about this recent tweet that spilled the beans on the Club of Rome's support, basically for Greta Thunberg. So I think that's a fascinating article. Basically, they were in support of the global student climate protests, and
they created them. Of course,
exactly.
So them,
that's the point. So that brings us back to what we were starting to talk about in the beginning of the show, and I wanted to bring in Sandy Adams. I'm going to try and get hold of Sandy. And see if I can.
Are we having a second half show?
I think we might do, actually. Maybe we should do that, because we are nearly run out of time. So we will be back for another show, which will actually be the next show on from this on our platform, windowsontheworld.net, and if you're going to listen to it on YouTube, it will be the next show on YouTube and BitChute, of course.
So this is in 10 minutes' time, is it?
This is in 10 minutes' time, or it's the episode after this. So, yes, it's really flown over tonight because I've been used to doing shows on my own for the last 2 months.
Right.
And we've actually had the two of us here tonight, co-host and co-host.
Oh, yes, co-host. Okay, co-host.
All right, then. So we'll see you in the next section of the show. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon.